All right, guys, I think we're just going to get this party started right now. Okay, so the next that we have is, I think, a topic that's near and dear to all of our hearts. Bitcoin Season 2. What does Ordinals actually mean for the future of Bitcoin? How is Ordinals changing Bitcoin very fundamentally in many ways outside of art alone? I'm very excited to announce Brett Herskope will be moderating this panel. And we have BitGod and Pryzm here to chat a little bit about how they see the future of Bitcoin and Ordinals. Welcome, Pryzm, BitGod, and Brett.
Thank you. We're going to have an empty chair, but that's all right. Come across. All right, so hopefully everybody filled their stomachs a little bit and enjoyed lunch. And it was an amazing morning, so I hope we can continue. So pressure's on, boys. So we might start off, I'm Brett Herskope. I'm head of community growth at Gamma, so it's just a pleasure to see everyone here and see this come together. It's been a really wild year. It's been, the fastest 10 months in my sort of 6 or 7 years in crypto. So very exciting times. And yeah, this panel's aptly named Bitcoin Season 2. So before we get into it, we'll just get the lads to introduce themselves. So we have Pryzm and we have BitGod, two names synonymous with the Bitcoin Ordinals space now. So I might get them to briefly introduce themselves and then we'll dive into it. Turn it on.
Yeah. I am Pryzm, founder of Counterfeit Culture. Got my co-founder, Boozy, right back there in the back row. Give him a shout out.
Boozy is also the artist for the Ninjas.
For the Ninjas, yeah, so that's right. He is pulling double duty, and his art is all over Ordinals.
I'm Chad, the co-founder of Quadrillion. I think Chief is somewhere here as well, but I'm excited for this panel.
Yeah, well, thank you guys. You've really been pushing hard in Ordinals, and we've been on Twitter Spaces together. It's fantastic to share a physical space. It's so funny. Some people come up and say, "Hey, Brett," and I'm like, "Oh," and then they tell me their Twitter handle. I'm like, "Oh, beautiful. Now I know who you are." So Chad and I have had a call before. Pryzm I've never seen in person, but I've known for a long time, since really early Gamma days. So we may as well dive straight in. We've got Bitcoin Season 2, but I want to take a step back, and I just want to think about, and we're seeing it on the timeline now with certain people, but how do you think that, Bitcoin is redefining Ordinals is redefining really what it means to be a Bitcoiner? We've seen perhaps what let's call them maxis, even though we're certainly maxis in our own ways, but how do you think that Ordinals has really redefined what it means to be a Bitcoiner or bring people to Bitcoin? We may as well go. Yeah, we'll go. I don't mind who goes first. You can just jump in, and then the other one can.
I think it's redefined it in a lot of ways. I think you go back probably 2 years ago, and no one was talking about JPEGs on Bitcoin. No one was talking about ERC20s, any of the meta protocols that are of course now here. That hundreds of millions of dollars has now passed through over these past 10 to 11 months or so. No one was talking about that, right? Everyone was probably talking about ETH, Ethereum, the next L1 that we saw blow up over these past, 2 to 3 years. And I think that's, somewhat of a problem. I think that a lot of the value prop for, what are the sort of the reasons that I think I'm here and I think many others are here is to sort of change that culture, what it means to be, building on Bitcoin. And I think, when you're having fun as well with JPEGs, with degen mints on Ordzar and some of these other things that of course has happened these past couple of weeks, like it's fun to be on Bitcoin again. And that's, I think, a really, sort of key point to Bitcoin Season 2.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of people who got pushed away from Bitcoin over the past few years. And, you see them on Ethereum and on L2s on Bitcoin and building some really cool stuff. And then Ordinals comes and we break this, I don't know what you want to call it, this barrier that's been holding people back, right? There's a lot of people who are Bitcoiners and they have to build elsewhere. And now we have the ability to build really cool shit right on L1. And so it's really cool. Like going back to the beginning, we have this this what you think a Bitcoiner is, but really it's this minority that are very loud, and we all of us just come right in and we just take over Bitcoin with Ordinals. And so it's been a fun ride to kind of redefine what Bitcoin is. It's not just about the money. It's Bitcoin is much bigger than that, and now we've all kind of come to that realization that we can do much more. I mean, this is the biggest file system, the biggest storage system, the most decentralized storage system out in the world. And so we just started from scratch. We didn't even worry about what the maxis had to say. And I think that's the proper thing to do moving forward too.
Yeah, I agree. I think that you both mentioned something really pertinent, and that was having fun. And the fact that I hesitate to use the word maxis, but just for the sake of this panel, let's just refer to them as maxis and pretend we know who we're talking about. That valid blocks, valid transactions, you can't stop it. What do you make? I wasn't going to go there, but let's touch on it briefly. What do you make of just a certain few people on Twitter who have been a little bit loud lately, and then, in comparison to what we've been doing all year and having fun and bringing, and we're going to get to that in my next question, bringing culture or a different culture through art to Bitcoin. But yeah, let's briefly go there. I didn't want to, but we'll do it.
I'm happy to go there, man. I'm happy to go there. I think it's been fun to fight with a lot of these guys over the past couple of days on Twitter. I think they have no clue what they're doing and really talking about, and they have an agenda. Like, I think Jack has really deep pockets. I don't know how long they're going to fund that, but at the end of the day, I think that Ordinals is really just capitalism in its sort of purest form. If miners want to feed their families, if they would like to maximize shareholder value, they're probably going to be doing and sort of securing Ordinals transactions. I think it's sort of as simple as that to me. And if Blue Ocean, or is it Ocean? I'm sorry, Ocean Mining and Luke think that they don't need to do that and they can still be profitable, then they can do that. And that's, I think, perfectly in their right as well. But I think that it's probably not going to happen that way. I think they eventually die.
Yeah, it's this fight against what actually pays the miners, right? Ordinals are good for the ecosystem overall. They're good for Bitcoin. They drive up the transaction fees, and better or worse, the miners are getting paid. I'm sure BitGod doesn't like seeing BRCs own the mempool as much as I do. But those things have miners happy, and I think that's a good thing for Bitcoin overall. I mean, we have the halving coming up. Rewards are cut in half. The fee rate will need to increase for Bitcoin to survive, and I think that's what Ordinals does. I think that's the biggest use case to Ordinals on top of the art and the culture and everything else.
Yeah. So quick poll in the audience: who owns an Ordinal so they've paid some fees to the miners this year? Heyo, everybody, that's awesome. All right, so I think we're talking the Renaissance. I love that. I've referred to it as the digital Renaissance. I think Casey put it really well in the first chat today about how it's the closest thing to physical ownership in the digital world. It's like very tangible of digital ownership. So how do you see how culture has been brought to Bitcoin through art?
How do we see culture being brought to Bitcoin with art?
Yeah, through art, with art, artists, collectors, etc.
So I think it's probably best first to talk about, I think, what an artist probably wants at the end of the day. And I think that if you're an artist, you probably want your canvas, the thing that you build on, to be really sturdy, right? To probably last at least a little while. And hopefully, maybe there's some canvases that last a lot longer than that. And I think that is, of course, what Bitcoin ultimately offers, right? And so I think that, when we were sort of talking with a number of artists for Volume 1, that was really the main pitch. I think, like, the sort of notion that you can have your art, your pieces on Bitcoin that'll probably outlast everyone on this stage and probably everyone, sort of in this audience right now. I think that that's really powerful. And so I think then, going from there, building, sort of interesting collections around that and making sure that people know, hey, this is just one of the unique pieces to why Bitcoin is interesting for your art. And I think from there, the culture starts to build around, what these artists really take of those sort of different constraints, what this sort of can offer as a canvas and more. And I think like we're just seeing really the start of that. And excited for the future really with different collections and different artists take on, what this sort of canvas really means to them.
Yeah, digital art has always had a culture that's different than traditional art, and I think we need to embrace that, right? I think we hear a lot about how do we get in front of the traditional market, but really what I think it's about is having the traditional market come to us. I mean, this is a revolution. This is, I mean, not just here on Ordinals, but also, going back to 2016, Rare Pepes, and that's really where this culture started. But now with Ordinals, we can hold this data, these images can forever on chain. And I always go back to this story from Zilla, who's a graffiti artist. You put a piece of work out there, and it can get tagged over tonight. It's not there tomorrow. You never know what's going to happen with it. And now you have the chance to store something completely immutably. You never have to worry about that. And as a collector, and I think we'll start seeing this here coming up, and as we go into this next run, IPFS isn't always there. If that project isn't around anymore, they're not going to pay for that. And so you'll start seeing some 404s, and that's when it'll kind of hit to some of those that haven't seen it yet. That's when it'll hit that, immutable art is really important. If I'm spending my money on digital art, I want that art that's going to live on forever. And so there's so many things that are just like, there's so many points that you can cling to, and just like, this is why I do this. You know what I mean? And it all comes together on the fucking granddaddy chain. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I love how people say granddaddy or daddy, but if anyone has had kids, then we know it should be called the grandmummy, because mums. I think that that they I feel like Bitcoin can be referred to as a matriarch, but
Brett, if I could add as well, I think that at least my view is like, probably myself, Pryzm as well, and some others, like, I think we're not going to be the ones that I think ultimately define the culture. I think ultimately what defines culture is the artist, right? The art is what defines culture. And so I think like it's ultimately us just being that bridge to some of these amazing artists that are both, brand new as well as established. They're going to be the ones that define the culture because of these constraints, right? Like some of the constraints is like file size, because of file size, that means probably different colors. It's just a whole different sort of range of constraints that we haven't seen before. And like, that's what's going to define culture, not necessarily, Pryzm or I. And that's just sort of my thesis, but, hopefully being able to enable those artists is what we can do. And I think Gamma's done that. And of course, other key companies in the Ordinal space have as well.
Yeah, so there's a pretty cohesive thread between, I guess, what us three are doing. So let's call it fine art for the sake of this panel. But before we go there, we've talked about how the artists drive it, but what about the collectors? And how do you see, like, it's bringing collectors? We go back to how it's bringing people to Bitcoin. Collectors form community. I know there's going to be a panel on community, so let's not, spend too long on it, but bringing collectors to Ordinals. I know that, I have my own collection. You guys have brought out, your different collections through Quadrillion and through Counterfeit. It's bringing people to Bitcoin. Sometimes it's the first Bitcoin they've purchased because they want to be in Ordinals. They're like, oh, I'm from ETH. How do I do all this? But how do you think that, one, it's, Ordinals affects them or brings them, or, like, what's the message you've been bringing to them? Because we've been talking about the message that you bring to the artists. Very clear message, your art outlives you, et cetera, of course, among many things. But what about the collectors? Because they're a big part and important part of the community as well.
Yeah, I think the collector community is still finding its way. We see a lot of interest in some other things. There's just so much going on in Ordinals, and now the community is starting to fragment. I'm more interested in BRCs. I'm more interested in the next PFP project. I'm more interested in art, and that's actually a good thing. And so as the community grows, we'll start to see these things kind of section off, and you might bleed over a little bit, but yeah, I mean the collector community is super important. I think when we first came here, let's just go back to February. there wasn't inscription services. There wasn't a way to inscribe work without spinning up a node. And I think those who did spin up a node and they gained a better understanding of what Bitcoin is and how the blockchain works and why Bitcoin's here and all those things. I think that's a super cool thing that I don't know if is being continued now that it's so easy. But we now have collectors in the ecosystem that have an appreciation for the art of the inscription, the art of getting the piece of work on chain. It is not an easy thing. Shout out Boozy, just fucking kills every single piece of art I throw at him. But it is not an easy thing. It's a very difficult thing to get your work under 400 kilobytes, especially considering like glitch work and photography especially. But you see an appreciation for what that is. So it might not look like a piece that you would collect on ETH, but you see that like graininess or whatever it is, and you appreciate it because it's on Ordinals, because of the work it took to get it on chain.
Yeah, I think talking to a lot of the collector community, I think what's become really clear is just having these amazing artists that of course have done incredible work on ETH or other chains is really great, right? Like seeing, of course, their proven sales, their proven following is great, but I think what they ultimately want to see is something different. They want to see something that's unique, because those artists can go to Solana, they can go to Tezos, they can go to other places they'd like, but just their sort of like same art or sort of same things that they've been doing elsewhere is great, but like they want to see really unique things. And I think one of the more recent things I saw was Unigraphs from Mulan. I think that whole sort of unique sort of Bitcoin generative art is something you can only find on Bitcoin. And I think like if you're a large collector, that's something that you're thinking about, is like, what is actually unique here, rather than like, okay, it's just on chain, it's just on the daddy chain. You need a little bit more than that. And so I think, rare sats could be a part of that in some sort of way, right? We've seen every other chain, of course, copy inscriptions, but they'll never be able to copy rare sats. And so I think really leaning into it, a lot of the things that make Bitcoin unique, other than of course the permanence, is I think what a lot of these collectors are really looking for.
Yeah, it's interesting that you bring up rare sats or exotic sats, numbered sats, etc., and they've got a lot more data that can be associated with them that might add to the narrative. I think that definitely plays into the Renaissance and perhaps season 2, where we're going. Do you want to both touch on that and how you have both used it and where you view it, or what you'd like to see, or perhaps hasn't been done that you've been thinking about?
Rare sats?
Rare sats, exotic sats,
yeah,
data associated with them, name sats, etc.
I'll be the minority here. I prefer sats that have a story over Rodimer rarity. I'll say it. So I think about some, like when we think about the canvas, sats as a canvas, it's a little bit more difficult to say, rare sats, uncommon sats, and all those things, as like this enhances the story that the art is telling. But things like Silk Road sats or Hitman sats or Block 78s or Block 9s, even like Block 286 or 677, like all of those blocks that Satoshi had his hands on, that you pair that with the artwork itself. And I think this is what people actually want. The participants in this market right now, I think it's less about, this traditional fine art and more about art that you can connect to and is a, sort of reflects the period of time that we're in. I think that's what people are really interested in. And so you tie that with the special sats, not necessarily rare, just special sats. I think it can enhance that story, and it's a little bit, it feels a little bit better to the collector.
Yeah. So I think, I really steal this from Billy, because I thought that when he said it on Spaces, I completely agree with it. So I think that Ordinals or Ordinal theory is, I think, sort of like the canvas, and then I guess rare sats is sort of like a really unique frame that you can, of course, sort of bring your work to. And I think that summarizes it really well. So I think when looking at it like that, I think that both Rodimer Rarity Index as well as these social consensus sats are really interesting. I think some of the things that we've seen so far is a lot of people are sort of like leaning into that probably a little too much, to where like that's the value prop, is like, hey, it's on block 9 sats, and then it's like, you know, it's like like a pixel pig or something, and it's like there's no connection to that. It's just you're just trying to sell it because, you know, of course block 9 sats have gone up a little bit. Like, you need to have some sort of connection, and I think like artists over time are going to try and tie that into the backstory of a certain piece, and like you're going to see that with, you know, maybe an artist that's like, I love uncommons. I want to do my sort of, you know, rendition of like what an uncommon means to me, as well as this uncommon is going to be on like my birthday or something, or like the first time I got into digital art, this is what this means to me. And I think that that's what's going to be really interesting about, you know, rare sats going into the future. And I think like, to this ocean mining thing, going back to that a second, I think that we can actually make a new one, a new social consensus sat. Maybe it's called maxi tier sats, where in the space we had a couple of weeks ago, or I'm sorry, just yesterday or 2 days ago, the maxis deeply regret Taproot, right? As an upgrade, they deeply regret that. So maybe like, you know, there's some sort of range around that time when Taproot was implemented that we can call the maxi tier sats. I'm proposing that now.
Let's make that a thing. Well, it's really interesting that you say that, because I know Violetta mentioned before that she received a sat that her song is inscribed, you know, with attached, you know, associated with. I know it's probably better not to say inscribed on, so associated with, but and it can be a common sat, and the date that it was mined might be relevant. So I think that it doesn't have to necessarily be. I like the Rotterdam rarity, to be honest, but I just think that there's so much interesting data associated with sats. I know Aaron is into astrology, and there's the degrees, and there can be all different things that I think we need to wrap it up. I looked at the time. I thought we had a few minutes. We'll wrap it up in just a minute. Let's get there then. So December 14th coming up, which will be 1 year since Casey inscribed Inscription 0. So 1 year, that's pretty wild. Let's just, you know, you can be outlandish, you can be a bit crazy. 2024 Ordinals, what's next just in your mind? Where do you think it's going? You know, beyond, you know, where are we, when season 3, but, you know, how are we going to get there?
I think we are experiencing what we can expect over the next couple of years right now, if you look at mempool.space. And it's going to be incredibly difficult for substantial projects to start on Ordinals. And so, you know, we see a lot of like free mints, pre-mints, you know, those sorts of things is sort of a way to combat those high fees. But I think the projects that are here, I'm really interested to see what these what all of these projects do moving forward to sort of lay their claim, because like the projects that are here have that advantage. I think there's a big advantage to being early, especially when fees are just so much higher right now. And so over the next year, I continue to expect a progression of like, we are just getting to the point where we're catching up to what we can do on other chains. But there's very interesting things that we can do specifically on Ordinals. And I'm looking forward to that point where we sort of pass that and like, okay, now we are, you know, this is the grand chain for, you know, art, for culture. This is provenance. This is everything. And I think that's just a matter of time. There's a lot of talk on CT right now about Ordinals being the #1 investment. So, and that's outside of us. So,
I think what you're going to see just over these next couple of years is a ton of innovation. I think I'm particularly bullish on Magic Internet JPEGs. I think rare sats is still probably the most overlooked and underserved part of Ordinals as a community right now. I think that you're going to go to Bitcoin Nashville and you're going to see, you know, a couple different Ordinals companies representing there, unlike we've seen in of course, in the past. It's just been a lot of mining companies, a lot of sort of like boring stuff. You're going to see probably in 2025 or maybe in 2024 at Bitcoin Asia, Ordinals companies will dominate, you know, the majority of the sort of booths and maybe talks as well at many of these conferences. So yeah, I'm looking forward to it. I think it's only up from here.
All right. Well, thank you.
Will be there.
Thank you very much, guys. It's been a pleasure to chat, and yeah, have fun on Bitcoin.